Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the rise and the seriously dramatic fall of the Sikh Empire. We're going to be digging through some fascinating handwritten historical notes that map out an absolutely unbelievable story. We're talking peak military might, brilliant diplomacy, and ultimately, a really tragic internal collapse.
I mean, it's honestly one of history's most mind-boggling questions, right? How does a highly organized, absolute powerhouse of a military just crumble from within? And not just crumble, but face total annexation by the British Empire in only 10 years. Just think about that. Decades of building power and consolidation, literally undone in a single decade. So, to wrap our heads around how that even happens, we actually have to go back and look at how this empire was built in the first place.
Now, the Sikh state didn't just pop up out of thin air. It evolved as a deeply intertwined religio-political entity. It all started after Guru Gobind Singh envisioned the Khalsa state. Early leaders like Banda Bahadur were constantly locked in these intense, grinding wars with the Mughal Empire. This went on right up until Bahadur's execution in 1715. And, as you might guess, that execution completely set the stage for a period of major turmoil.
Because with his death, a massive political vacuum opened up in the Punjab region. And suddenly, you have rival empires rushing in and clashing for control. Nadir Shah defeats the Mughals in 1739, and then the Afghans defeat the Marathas later in 1761. But here's the catch. While all these massive empires were fighting over the territory, they totally failed to actually govern it. So you've got all this external pressure, but absolutely zero central administration holding things together on the ground.
Well, you know what they say, nature abhors a vacuum, and politics definitely does too. So, to survive all this chaos, local Sikh Sardars actually stepped up to the plate. They began organizing the region into these independent, constituted territories. And that brings us to a super important historical term for today's explainer, the missile.
There were exactly 12 of these missiles. You can kind of picture the Punjab region back then like a giant shattered jigsaw puzzle, split into a dozen independent local factions. And they were basically just waiting for a unifying force to piece them all back together. Now, being fragmented like this meant the region was incredibly vulnerable, sure, but it also meant it was perfectly ripe for a strong leader to step in and consolidate power.
And that unifying force, that was Ranjit Singh, who came from the Sukar Chakya Misk. He was exactly what the region needed, an incredibly clever diplomat, a skilled administrator, and a really courageous soldier. Under his leadership, all those puzzle pieces finally came together. He managed to unite all the missiles west of the Sutlej River, officially establishing a unified Sikh kingdom. I mean, he literally changed the course of history here.
What he did next was an absolute masterclass in strategy. In 1809, he went ahead and signed a treaty of friendship with the English, using the Sutlej River as a hard boundary. This was brilliant. It completely secured his eastern flank, buying him the peace and stability he desperately needed. Instead of constantly looking over his shoulder for a British invasion, he could focus entirely on building up his state from the inside.
And with those borders locked down, Ranjit Singh transformed his kingdom into a legitimate global powerhouse. He built up a military force with artillery that was so advanced it actually ranked as the second-best army in all of Asia. So we aren't just talking about a local militia here. This was a highly formidable military machine standing toe-to-toe on the world stage.
But here's where the story takes a really tragic nosedive. Almost the exact moment Ranjit Singh died in 1839, the entire thing started falling apart. Without his ironclad leadership and diplomatic genius, all that stability he had spent his entire life building was suddenly wide open to ambition and betrayal.
The whole state was instantly thrown into a brutal succession crisis. I mean, within just one single year, the royal lineage was practically wiped out. First, Ranjit Singh dies. Then, in 1840, his son Karak Singh is assassinated. And if that wasn't enough, his grandson is killed that very same year. In a matter of months, the empire's central authority was just completely shattered in this wild whirlwind of violence.
So power eventually defaults to his youngest son, Dalip Singh, along with the Queen Mother, Rani Jindal. But the real issue here? The internal rot. Corrupt Sardars, including the Prime Minister and the Commander, just started serving themselves instead of the state. They completely disastrously misread British intentions. It really goes to show that internal selfishness is often an empire's absolute biggest vulnerability. They were busy chasing personal wealth right when the kingdom desperately needed total unity.
And of course, this internal weakness, this blatant selfishness at the very top of the government, pretty much rolled out the red carpet for British interference into Punjab's political and military systems. The British saw the chaos, saw an opportunity, and took it. This tension boiled over into the First Anglo-Sikh War, which lasted from 1845 to 1846. And without the unity they used to have under Ranjit Singh, that once mighty Sikh army faced a truly humiliating defeat.
The fallout from that was a devastating blow. The 1846 Treaty of Lahore wasn't just your standard peace agreement. It was a subsidiary alliance that literally placed a British resident right inside the capital. And to make matters worse, British soldiers occupied the city, and the badly weakened Sikh state was forced to pay this massive war indemnity. Functionally, their independence was just gone.
But, you can't just strip a once great empire of its pride, occupy its capital, and expect everything to just be fine and dandy. The explosive tension created by the Treaty of Lahore ended up erupting into the Second Anglo-Sikh War just 2 years later, running from 1848 to 1849. And this time, it was overseen by the British Governor-General, Lord Dalhousie.
There were basically 3 distinct sparks that ignited this final conflict. First off, the Sikh Sardars realized the massive mistakes they'd made and actively wanted revenge for their previous humiliation. Second, there was huge outrage over the treatment of the Queen Mother, Rani Jindan, who was unceremoniously exiled on conspiracy charges. And third, all this widespread anger finally crystallized into a localized rebellion led by Mulraj, the governor of Multan.
Now, for Governor-General Lord Dalhousie, this revolt was exactly the pretext he was looking for. He didn't just send in a military force to put down a local rebellion in Multan. Oh no, he sent a massive army to completely crush the uprising and to officially, definitively annex the entire Sikh state into the British Empire. Just like that, the sovereign state forged by Ranjit Singh was formally erased from the map.
Looking at it all laid out, the contrast is absolutely tragic. On one hand, you have a state that just recently boasted the second-best army in all of Asia. On the other, an empire completely dismantled. The young king, Dalip Singh, and his mother were entirely removed from power, exiled all the way to England, and literally forced to live out their days on a pension handed out by the very empire that had just conquered them.
It leaves us with an incredibly stark historical lesson on just how fragile power really is. We can see firsthand how quickly poor leadership, corruption, and internal division can tear down even the most formidable military machines. It really makes you wonder, how completely different would history look today if that internal political vacuum following Ranjit Singh's death had never opened up in the first place? Thanks so much for exploring this with me today. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.